Well, welcome back today. Today we have a very special guest, Dr. Sharon Goldberg. But I'm just going to jump right in and read her bio because her bio speaks for itself. Dr. Sharon Goldberg has been practicing medicine since 2000, dedicating over a decade to acute care and internal medicine in both New York City and Miami. During this time, she played a pivotal role in training hundreds of medical students and residents while serving as a hospital medicine physician. As her career progressed, she observed a troubling trend, an increasing number of younger patients being admitted with conditions traditionally seen only in older populations. Recognizing that genetic factors do not change within a short time frame, she began investigating the nutritional and environmental influences on diseases, ultimately leading her to explore integrative medicine and clinical research. In 2015, Dr. Goldberg established an integrative and functional medicine practice in Bay Harbor Islands, Florida. Several years later, she relocated to Santa Fe, New Mexico, where she continues a practice in integrative medicine. She is passionate about having the time necessary to thoroughly evaluate complex patients and utilizes advanced tools and testing to assess personalized lifestyle, nutritional, and environmental factors, including exposure to chemical toxins, mold, and electromagnetic fields, as part of her diagnosis and treatment. Dr. Goldberg finds great fulfillment in integrative medicine as it allows her to combine the strengths of conventional medicine with safe and effective complementary therapies. She takes pride in blending these approaches to offer holistic and individualized care, helping her patients achieve optimal health and well-being. Let's meet Dr. Goldberg.
Hi.
Hey, Dr. Goldberg, thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy practice. I know you just had a full day of clinic and you're going to give us a little bit of time to educate us about integrative medicine and about EMFs and other specialties that you're aware of. So let's talk about the paradigm shift in medicine. So you've practiced medicine since 2000. You started out as an internal medicine specialist, but then there was a turning point where you stepped outside of conventional medicine and into this integrative medicine. Can you describe that process, what that is, and what that means?
I've always had kind of an integrative mindset, and I think I see this with other colleagues who do integrative medicine. Often it's just the upbringing that what you get from your parents. In my family, we were growing our own food. There wasn't a lot of processed food. My mom was cooking. I had that kind of background. So like that, I started from there. And then I was fortunate I trained at a medical center at Beth Israel in New York that has a lot of integrative stuff going on. And it was just a part of my training, and I was able to work in that. But I then learned about functional medicine when I was working at the University of Miami. I was working there as a hospital medicine doctor, and the Institute for Functional Medicine was rolling out this pilot program to train medical school faculty and house staff in functional medicine. So it was mostly faculty, and we had a few medical students and residents in this program, and it was a few years of studying from some of the top functional medicine people that they were flying out once a month to teach us. And so it was a great introduction. But I was still working in hospital medicine and still just kind of plugging along. And then you asked kind of what was the pivotal moment. Really, the pivotal moment was one day I was rounding at Jackson Memorial Hospital with our team. This is like sort of like Miami's Bellevue. It's a large teaching hospital, and they had just presented one of the overnight admissions that was a relatively young guy with a diabetic foot ulcer that was really bad. Like it was quite bad, and we weren't sure if it was a bone infection or not. So we were I was me actually probing with the Q-tip to see if that ulcer was going to bone or not, because that was what we needed to know. And I kind of had this experience where I was looking at the guy and doing this, checking this ulcer and thinking like, oh my God, this guy, I think he was maybe 32 years old. He was really young. And I'm thinking, this guy has such advanced diabetes and this is awful, but how many other people are there out there like him? And why are we doing this now? Why aren't we intervening earlier? And like it was kind of a transformational moment for me because at that point I was like I've got to do something else. Like I need to do more prevention and less of this kind of like picking up the pieces, like the Humpty Dumpty picking up the pieces after he falls off the wall. So that was the moment for me that kind of changed things.
That's awesome. And as a doctor, I can relate to that. There's so many things that we do that are just putting on band-aids to dealing with symptomology or symptom management rather than getting to the root cause, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so can you talk about that in terms of how important that is for critical long-term health of patients when we're talking about preventative rather than just, symptomology management, meaning that blood pressure's up, you give them a blood pressure med versus dealing with why that blood pressure is up in the first place, right? If you can just touch base on that, that would be really helpful for our viewers.
That's what integrative medicine is all about. And like just there are lots of terms thrown around and maybe people will recognize it as functional medicine, but integrative is the term that I know that you know that term because you come from academic medicine and the doctors generally understand that integrative medicine means that you are not eliminating conventional medicine. So you are continuing to keep the sort of conventional medical issues and tools in your toolbox, but at the same time, you are thinking about and applying sort of you're open to all sorts of other different tools and ways to assess a patient and to help a patient. So to help them kind of prevent disease before it happens and to identify problems early. So like you were giving that hypertension example, right? So the idea would be before someone develops high blood pressure, you would want to look at how can you keep this person in balance? What are the ways to identify like good health and how do you build good health? That's really what we're looking at, right? We don't want to just fix the person after they've really been sick for a long time and then developed a disease like high blood pressure.
Yeah, absolutely. And then you also talk about the body as being, like a warning signs or having warning signs for serious illnesses. Can you talk a little bit about that? How you as a physician look at the body and the warning signs that put up the red flags?
And so what I mean by that is that so the history that a doctor like me, an integrative or a functional doctor gets to take is very different than the kind of history that I would be able to take in my earlier life, like when I used to work, let's say I did outpatient at Mount Sinai Hospital many years ago, like precepting residents and seeing like so if you have 10, 15 minutes, you're very limited, right? So you can't really get like you don't have enough time to really get to those like warning. What are the warning signs? What are what you're asking about? So the point is that it really all starts with having enough time to take a very thorough history and really get to know the person and hear really what's going on as far as how is their energy level, how is their digestion, how is their sleep, what are they eating, what exercise, movement, light exposure. It's just so many different factors that integrative doctors are able to ask about. And so those would be like warning signs. To give you a few examples of my top three would be number one would be fatigue. Fatigue is a huge one because if someone is in good health, right, and they're sort of balanced, they're going to have good energy and they're not going to need to rely on coffee or other stimulants to keep their energy up through the day, right? So that would be number one. Number two would be digestion. And I think that there is a lot of we see a lot of digestive issues nowadays in adults and even in children. I mean, when I was in training, when we were in training, we were exactly the same age and trained at the same time. Like I'm sure like NSAIDs in babies, like reflux in babies, like that never happened. There's so many things that never used to happen, right? Like diabetes was type 2 diabetes was really uncommon, and definitely not you would never see that in a young person. So anyway, so that was warning sign number two would be digestive problems, because that's another issue that that will, if it's not taken care of, then that will lead to other problems down the road. So if you're not absorbing nutrients, we are not necessarily what we eat, right? That's what you hear, like you are what you eat. But it's not really true, because we are what we assimilate, right? So you can eat it, but then you have to digest it and absorb it, right? So digestion is really, really important. So fatigue, digestion, and then sleep. And they're not necessarily in order. These are just kind of three things that are, when there's a problem with any of these three things, then it means that like we need to do some work, because there's potential for problems down the road. So sleep is a huge one, and sleep is another issue that, like 20, 25 years ago, right, when we were in training, insomnia it really wasn't a thing, right? It wasn't a big issue. And also it wasn't like every other person had obstructive sleep apnea. That is a very bizarre thing too, right? That like all of a sudden everyone has OSA. It's not, anyway, but that's another issue. So sleep. So if people either can't fall asleep, they can't sleep through the night, they wake up feeling unrefreshed. So like all of those sleep issues. So those are like the top three warning signs that I consider, where they wouldn't be warning signs in a conventional practice, but in the integrative and functional world, those are areas where it's like, okay, we need to kind of act on those things.
Yeah, that's a big deal. I'm also trained in aerospace medicine, and you named two of the big ones: fatigue and sleep disorders. In pilots, anybody dealing with aviation, if they have any of those problems with sleep or fatigue, it's a serious problem, because they don't function well, their immune system's down, they can get sick more, and there's just literally, if you're sleep deprived, you can actually be drunk as if you were drinking a few beers. And so it's a serious problem. But all these warning signs also lead you, because you have more time. Because other doctors, that are dealing with sick care, where they're dealing with CPT codes and ICD codes that are literally just really what is the patient feeling bad about, and they get paid for taking care of those symptoms. So really, most doctors only have, like, let's say 5 to 10 minutes with patients. They're only dealing with suppression of symptoms. If you're feeling sad, I'll give you a pill. But for you dig deeper, right? And you're dealing with like environmental toxins, mold, and even electromagnetic fields. Can you share, examples of cases that you've dealt with that where you address those factors and they helped those three things that you're talking about: fatigue, digestion problems, and also, sleep disorders?
Oh, I can definitely talk about that. I think one thing that is so important to bring up is that in integrative medicine, it really is all about the time. And it isn't that, that integrative functional doctor, it's not like we're like these rocket scientists that it's like, oh, well, we made this diagnosis and we help this person, and it's like that versus conventional. It is just not the case. It is when you have the time, right? And I know that you remember this, right? Like 20 years ago when you were in training, there was more time for everything, right? There was more time for education, there was more time for patient care, right? And we were actually able to be doctors, right? But in the system now, it makes it pretty impossible or very difficult, because you don't have enough time to properly work up a patient. So, okay, so you were asking about an example of a case where addressing one of these issues made a difference. So really, I think that to answer that question properly, I have to give you a case of someone because when I see someone, the interventions, it isn't usually one thing at a time, right? So we will work on whatever needs work on, but often it is diet, it will be supplementation, it can be then environmental stuff. So it's hard to say when you're getting in there and kind of making all these changes that, oh, well, yeah, it was the mold, that by getting rid of the mold, you fix the problem, or it was the EMF. But I do have one guy who's actually a very good example. So this was a middle-aged man who had sort of the internal medicine alphabet soup of everything. He had had a heart attack and he has a stent in his heart. He had diabetes. Well, he's pre-diabetic by the time I saw him. He had some renal insufficiency, a bunch of other problems. He was on a lot of medication. But the point is, he had already done a lot of functional medicine before coming to me. So he was already on a lot of supplements. He had a very, I would say, near pristine diet, was exercise. He was kind of doing everything else. So really the only thing that we started working on environmental issues. And one of the big issues that he had was an unusually bad history of allergies. And we're talking decades back. He had to be given courses of prednisone and other steroids because his allergies were so bad, because he couldn't function. This is not with me, but this was maybe 20 years ago. So when I took the history, and his presentation was suspicious for mold exposure. And he was really not interested in talking about this. He didn't like the idea, as many people are not interested in talking about mold, because it's kind of an unpalatable. These environmental topics, sometimes people just don't want to deal with them. And I understand. I get that. So I talked to him about that, and I said, well, why don't we test you and just see if you have exposure, then if it's in you, then we can have someone take a look at your house. And so sure enough, he tested positive for several mold toxins. And then when we did the follow-up, and he said, well, I do have this water stain. And so there were some areas of his home that were water damaged. And so he tested it, and it turned out to be Stachybotrys. It was black mold, and it actually matched what was in his lab test. So it made sense that it was coming from his home. He got it remediated. He did treatment, and this man's allergies were gone, within 3 to 4 months, and then we retested. So that was an example of mold, but it definitely can make a big difference. Mold toxins suppress the immune system. They have so many different can have so many different effects. So that's one example. And then with EMF, the examples are everywhere. And I know you know all about this, but I think a classic example would be with memory and with focus, or with depression. When the only way that you can really see the effect of EMFs on a person is by lowering their exposure in the home. And so you can compare the symptoms before the exposure is lowered, and then see how they're doing after. And it's very common. Like, sleep gets better in many people. People with Alzheimer's disease, often their MoCA scores go up. They're doing better. All sorts of problems can go away. Diabetes can improve, like blood glucose levels can go down, and they can require less medication. So there are lots of examples like that.
That's great. Yeah, I just want to remind for the viewers, and I know you have a slide that I'm going to put up here on the screen, but there's 4 types of electromagnetic pollution in the home. That's the EMF, the electromagnetic fields. There's also the magnetic fields. There's the microsurge electrical pollution, or classically called dirty electricity, and also radio frequencies like the 5Gs and the Wi-Fi. All these are health hazards. And I work for an organization. I'm on ships, for example, and I can't really say what I do because, this is my private capacity. But there are basically situations where in front of radio dishes, you can actually cook like meat and hot dogs just by.
I've heard about that. Does people actually do that?
They do.
Oh,
You can do it. And actually, one of my patients used to work in this field of electromagnetic energies, and they said that the first microwaves were discovered because the guys working on the dishes or the microwaves, they had like candy bars in their pockets that literally melted while they were working in front of these microwaves. And that's when they realized that microwaves can actually cook food and the energy can be harnessed for heating up food and such, right? But I just want to remind people that the human body, just because you survived that and you didn't have a stroke, or, you didn't drop down dead, or you didn't get electrocuted right away, doesn't mean your cells aren't getting damaged. Your body has the capacity to heal itself. So the way I describe it for patients is that early on into the, like early exposures, a child or a young healthy person has the capacity to regenerate and replace those damaged cells. But as you get older, your capacity decreases, and all of a sudden you'll develop disorders because you just can't replace those damaged cells. So Dr. Goldberg, describe how these in general, EMFs damage cells, and what do we know based on the research, especially the research that you sent me, last night?
Well, we know a lot, contrary to what you would think from reading the newspaper, since this topic has been largely kept out of mainstream media. But we've got, I think, probably 7 decades at this point of research showing that exposure to electromagnetic fields, it has all sorts of effects. So maybe it's just easier if we just talk about give a few examples.
Yeah, let's talk about oxidative stress.
So oxidative stress, and let me just back up for a second. EMF, and if we're talking about wireless, damages cells and tissue structures in many ways. So there's DNA damage, there's activation of heat shock proteins, there's so many things, changes of pH. But oxidative stress is the easiest to talk about because we understand that oxidative stress is associated with pretty much all of the diseases of modern civilization. So when you think about, well, what does that mean? It means autoimmunity. It means cardiovascular disease, so heart attack and stroke. It means diabetes and other metabolic problems. It means even hyperlipidemia. So many of these conditions, when if you were to go to the medical literature and look for, well, what's the mechanism behind diabetes, or what's the mechanism behind cardiovascular disease? So you would find oxidative stress included in these articles. And why does this matter? It matters because it's been proven, and there's no doubt at this point, it's been completely proven that exposure to wireless radiation causes oxidative stress. So pretty much, so people will say, well, can you really prove that my router or Wi-Fi could give me cardiovascular disease or diabetes? What I'll say is that this exposure causes oxidative stress. And so oxidative stress causes all these other health problems that we know. So we can't, at this point, we can't study it anymore, right? And Andrew, you're an MD, PhD researcher. You have this incredible, you've done pretty much everything at this point, or almost everything. But you understand that it's, in order to study any kind of an intervention or an exposure, you have to have a control group, right? So with exposure to wireless, for instance, many times people will say, oh, well, they haven't done the research yet, or we need the research. So that's a really interesting statement, right? Because where are you going to get the control group from? Right? There is no control group. Everyone, maybe there are some people on the north, I don't know. Even the Amish people in Pennsylvania, I'm sure that there are cell towers near where they live. Right? I don't think we have any control group. Maybe somewhere in Africa, I don't know.
Yeah.
But so there's no way that you could really study it now. So we have to rely on the older research. So everything that we have already, we have a ton of that. And then the other kind of research that we can do is remediation research. So, and this is essentially what sort of the N of one things like what you're doing with your grounding, right? Or your community does. The experiments that you do on yourself, or where a person will, or someone could do it for you, but that you have the exposure and then you take the exposure away and then you see what happens. Well, are there medical problems that go away? That's the research that we can do.
And that's very powerful. Just because it's an N of one doesn't discredit the power of this, right? Because anytime in medicine, if Dr. Goldberg or myself can take away something and the patient improves and that condition goes away, we know it was the thing that that was removed. So for example, the EMF in my bedroom, for example, causes I can measure with a body voltage, right? A 4 volts alternating current in my body from capacitive coupling, just being in the EMF environment in my bedroom. I turn off the circuit breaker and that thing drops 90%. So my body voltage plummets to under 1 volt. It goes to basically a few hundred millivolts at that point. So I know that something happened in my body, and then I can measure, like take a little diary. How's my sleep? Am I feeling better? Did my blood pressure go down? How's my glucose level? If that's the only thing I changed in my life, I know it was the EMF in my surroundings in the bedroom that caused the problem. That's what Dr. Goldberg means. That's very powerful.
That's amazing that you figured this out. It just seems like very unusual for people to be thinking about this,
Well, thank you. I have patients who come with, like yourself, they come with Google searches and they ask me. So instead of just discounting them, and I think this is the integrative medicine part that I really enjoy, is that I'm not an integrative medicine physician, by the way, but I just enjoy listening to the patients and then investigating rather than just saying, oh, you're nuts, or, you don't know as much as me, so just be quiet. I'll look into it. And so when I go to PubMed and I do this research, I pulled up, now you showed me a slide of 100 papers that have basically shown oxidative stress related to radio frequencies and EMF in the literature. So I found a few of those and I started reading them. I'm like, wow, this stuff is real stuff. You can't ignore this. And that's when it changed my life and also changed my patient's life, because I deal with ocular inflammation, for example. So I have patients who are on steroids chronically because of a inflammatory disease of the eye. However, when I take away the EMF or they start to ground or earth after using conventional medicine, I don't discount, prednisone and other steroid agents. But man, they got better. They got so well that they actually stopped using their years and years and decades long in some patients of steroid use because their inflammation disappeared. And as an ophthalmologist, I get to see that with a slit lamp. I see it down to the cell level of the inflammation in the eye. And so I know confidently that my patients are actually improving because we took the EMF away.
That's amazing. So cool.
Let's talk about like EMFs and cardiovascular disease. What do you think is happening there that's causing, heart problems and hypertension and cardiovascular disease?
I don't think that there's a simple answer to that. I think that definitely the oxidative stress is a part of it. But then as far as so if we talk about cardiovascular disease, or if we're going to talk about heart attacks, we're going to talk about strokes, I think there's different things going on. So number one, for sure, exposure to wireless. And with any EMF, if you have a short-term exposure, whether it's to a radio frequency radiation, so higher frequency, or the lower frequency, like 60 hertz coming from your electrical outlet, for instance. If it's a short-term exposure, then you can have therapeutic effects. It's not necessarily a bad thing if you have a short-term exposure from any of those EMFs. But once the exposure becomes chronic, and this is something that's been known for a long time, and I think the Ford Motor Company did a report they did a lot of research on EMF exposure. And I'm pretty sure that this is where I saw it, that they were talking about the effect on I think it was adrenals and cortisol. So the point is that if you have chronic exposure to Wi-Fi, for instance, over time, so because it triggers a fight or flight response, it puts you in a more sympathetic place, right? So more fight or flight, your body is ready to either like run from a tiger or like fight and defend yourself. You're getting ready to run away from some type of a mortal threat. And it's this evolutionary response, right? So chronic wireless exposure will put you in a sympathetic state chronically over time. And what ends up happening is these exposures over time end up leading to HPA axis dysfunction. So hypothalamus, pituitary, adrenal. So it's like the thermostat that controls the release of cortisol and our fight or flight hormones. So this adrenal exhaustion or HPA dysfunction is a result of chronic exposure to wireless frequencies. So that would be number one. Number two, there are direct electrical effects of these EMFs on the heart. There have been studies showing that if you deliver a pulse of radio frequency at a particular time in the cardiac cycle, you can trigger an arrhythmia. So, and this was not in people. This was in, I think it was in, was it a frog? It was in an animal. It was not in a person. So there are different ways that it can cause effects. There are also effects on pH. There's effects on energy production in the mitochondria. So just so many different ways. And then with stroke, it is those effects plus the question of, well, if you're holding your phone near your head, right? Well, where are the strokes happening in young people? And this is not like, no one's proven this, but if you look at the statistics for stroke in the young, where a person holds the phone, they're going to have more of an effect. And there's most likely, if you're causing oxidative stress to blood vessels, right? And if someone has a predisposition for developing a stroke, then you could potentially trigger a stroke.
With the rise of 5G, Wi-Fi, smart devices, more EMF devices that are flooding the market, even solar panels produce like dirty electricity. Obviously, our EMF exposure is nearly unavoidable. But what are practical steps do you tell people that they can do to reduce their risk?
Andrew, there's so many things that people can do, but I put together a handout that I know that you're going to give a link that people can download if they want. Just because, and in this handout, I was thinking about, well, what are the really kind of high impact things that I want to tell people to do? Because there are huge laundry lists of things that when you start searching, oh, how do I reduce my EMFs? There are like a million things that you can do, and it can get a little bit overwhelming. So I'll give you some of my top three, maybe three. I'll give you a couple of things that I think are really, really important, right? Because we have control over our stuff, right? The things that we buy. We have control over our home, like what's in our home, and we have control over our car. Most people, like not all of us have control over our office, but if you have an employee, you can't necessarily control that. So I would start with the things that are going. So number one, I think that one of the most impactful things you can do is look at the meters on your house. Like look at your electric meter, look at your gas and your water meter. And if you have smart meters, meaning if they are meters that are emitting pulsed radio frequency radiation, I would contact the electric company, contact the utility company, and find out how you can opt out of those meters. Because those meters, and it depends on the meter, but many of the smart meters for electricity are pulsing tens of thousands of times a day. And it is very jarring to the human body. And so that is, I would say, number one, really, you want to do that. Number two, all sorts of wearable technology. That is something that if you are concerned about health and you want to lower your exposure, I would pass on anything wearable. So meaning the smartwatches, meaning the AirPods that go in the ears, anything that's on your body. And I can tell you that with the hot smartwatches, sometimes I will have patients come in wearing these and they think that it's a health thing. And so there were a few people that I actually measured. I measured the RF for them just to show them and then to explain to them kind of what did that mean. And the highest reading that I got was 500,000 microwatts per meter squared off of one of my patient's smartwatches. And just so you understand, so the watch is going right against your wrist, and the antenna, meaning it's getting emitted right onto you. So can you imagine 500,000 microwatts into someone's body, repeatedly throughout the day? It's just causing oxidative stress, causing DNA damage, putting you in fight or flight, right? Like sympathetic predominant mode. Like who wants that? And maybe there are some exceptions, right? So you could make the case if someone has type 1 diabetes and they need to really, of course that makes sense, all right? But if it's just for fun, or just for the sake of convenience, I would pass on anything wearable. And then the third really big ticket item has to do with, I'll give you four, has to do with the car, with using your phone in the car. Because when you take a cell phone, and if you really measure things right, like you measure it in an area where there's no cell antennas and no other sources of EMF, if you measure the EMF from the phone, and then you take it in the car and you take a measurement again, it goes up by about 100, like a factor of 100. So it's a really big exposure, and that's because the car is an enclosed metal space, and it's just the RF is not, it's bouncing off the car and it's not getting out of the car. So when you drive, I recommend turning off the phone, or at least putting it in airplane mode if you know that the phone has a reliable airplane mode. Not all phones do. Sometimes you can put it in airplane mode and it still has some emissions. So I would turn off the phone, and I would ideally, if you can turn off the Bluetooth in your car, it's best to not have wireless when you're driving. I know this is kind of close to impossible nowadays if you have a new car, but that is important. And then the obvious things of looking at your home, looking at what you're using in your home. So if you're using Wi-Fi for internet, contact the internet service provider and see if you can have a hardwired connection. You just use a cable and hook everything up with a cable, and it's faster, it's more secure. Maybe it's not as convenient because you can't use it everywhere, but you can have your house hardwired for Ethernet. It can make a huge difference, especially if there are children in the house. So I guess those are my top four. But I have more in the, if you want more, there's more in the PDF download.
Absolutely, and I'll put the link for the download for people to grab that PDF. It's an excellent PDF, by the way. I really found it to be an incredible resource. So, let's talk about, one thing that I thought that was fascinating, because I was taking a course in the Building Biology Institute on how to measure the dirty electricity using an oscilloscope. And your name popped up, Dr. Sharon Goldberg, and then also, they were referring to the fact that basically bacteria and fungi can actually grow better in an EMF field. So having EMF and RF around can actually improve bacterial and not anti, but fungal growth, as well as promoting possibly their resistance to antimicrobials. Can you talk about that? Because I found that to be fascinating, that, we've never talked about this in pharmacology in med school, right? We never talked about this in pathophysiology, but this is a huge one, because, we have an increase in bacteria and microorganisms that are resistant to medications and drugs.
Yeah. Yeah. No, and I love this topic. And this is a really crazy topic to think about as a doctor, right? Because we've always been told, or sort of the party line is that, antibiotic resistance has to do with the overuse of antibiotics. And I have no doubt that that's a part of it. But what if, right? What if there was some other factor, right? So what I've learned about bacteria and EMF exposure, and I'm going to talk just about wireless, but some of the other frequencies have similar effects. There have been some very interesting studies done exposing different strains of bacteria to radio frequency radiation. And what they've come up with is that, so first of all, the effects are different depending on the organism that they're looking at. Okay, but sort of the take home message of all of this is that what seems to happen is that, because wireless radiation, radio frequency, and I use these two interchangeably in the conversation. Mm-hmm. These frequencies are new, right? They're not like all of alternating current electricity. It's only been around it hasn't been more than 150 years, right? I mean, it's been less than that. So evolutionarily, bacteria have not they recognize this as a threat. They recognize it as something that they've never seen before, and it's not something that they can really adapt to. So when they detect this exposure, it seems that they go to they kind of panic, and it's like this sort of DEFCON 1 moment that they're like, oh my God, it's like war, we're being attacked. And so certain bacteria have better defenses against wireless exposure than others. And so ones that can produce spores will produce spores because it gives them some measure of protection. Okay. And then ones that cannot. And so, for instance, there was a study with Pseudomonas that, that is, it's a big hospital pathogen and often resistant to antibiotics. Studies showing that after 24 hours of exposure at 900 megahertz, it became resistant. It became resistant to antibiotics. And there have also been studies with Staph aureus showing that when you expose them to radio frequency, that it also makes the Staph aureus resistant to antibiotics. And that one was from a cell phone simulator. So definitely there is this antibiotic-like effect that wireless radiation has on certain bacteria, not all, and it depends on the frequency and there are so many factors. But the point is that our cell phones and our wireless have this antibiotic-like effect, right? And then the second thing is that it encourages the growth of it encourages spore formers. So certain bacteria are going to grow more than others, right? Now, and then third factor is to think about the effect on the microbiome, because there was also a study done looking at the effect of I think there were like 5G. It was high frequency. I don't remember the exact frequency. It was high frequency microwaves. So 5G is very high frequency microwave, right? On Lactobacillus acidophilus, and it was as effective as, I think it was ceftazidime, as a major cephalosporin, like in its killing effect. So that kind of, you take a step, I take a step back and think, wow, we're taking our probiotics but our microbiome is all over the body, right? It's not just in the gut, it's on our skin, under our arms, it's all over the place. So it's on the outside as well as on the inside. And what's on the outside communicates with what's on the inside and shapes it and changes it, what's in the mouth, what's in the nose. And so wireless frequencies are affecting the bacteria that are living on our bodies, bacteria that are in hospitals. Like, we have no idea what these frequencies are doing as far as what is their contribution to antibiotic resistance. So it's a really huge issue. It's really fascinating. I think it just needs to be studied more. Also with implants, right? In the hospital. I mean, if you have Wi-Fi in the OR and people are getting, like joint replacements, or like, how does that affect even though like it's sterilized, right? But still, it's a big issue.
Yeah. So it sounds like there's positives and as well as negatives, right? We just don't know. So we need to study what frequencies do what to what bacteria. That sounds that's what you're saying.
Well, the point is that these frequencies affect bacteria in a stressful manner. Okay, so the bacteria get stressed. When bacteria get stressed, they end up sort of going into panic mode, right? And they genetically they will manifest. So you'll have increased biofilm, right? So they roll out all of their protective measures. So biofilm, spore forming, if they can, increase motility for the ones that can. There are all of these protective measures, but they become more virulent. So that's the point. Like, it increases, these are all the virulence factors. That's how it works with bacteria. So it's not a good thing. Like, It could be a good thing when it's used to expose, like they use it in water. They can use certain frequencies to sterilize water or to sterilize things. That could be a good application. But when it comes to these frequencies and their effect on bacteria in the environment, this is not a good thing, that we are increasing the virulence in different bacteria and making them feel panicked, because basically they feel like it's a threat. They perceive it as a threat.
And that's why they thrive. And that's why they become a problem.
The ones that survive.
Yes.
Yeah.
Interesting. So let's talk about call to action here as we close. For those who are watching and they're feeling sick and they're ill with chronic diseases, they don't know what to do. do they contact you? Do you do like virtual consults, or what would your recommendation to them to help them to reclaim their health?
Well, so I'm licensed in Florida and New Mexico, and so I don't do consults for people outside of those states. But what I am doing is I have a free class coming up in the spring on May 21st that I'm offering to anyone who would like to do, and it's just a 1 hour online class, and it's focusing on fatigue and on integrative approaches to fatigue. So that would be, a lot of the things that I do with patients, in the office, we'll be discussing those things, and they would have an opportunity to ask questions. It's a live class. So I'm definitely going to be doing that. I have a blog where I write about different topics and integrative sort of solutions and approaches to different medical problems. And they can sign up for my mailing list for updates. I do interviews or things like that.
That's great. And I'll put the link to your website on the screen here for people. But
Great.
Dr. Goldberg, thank you so much for, man, your wisdom and sharing your knowledge with us all. I think this is all incredible stuff that needs to be more research. And hopefully, there will be money for this and, money for research into this field more. But I think that, it's going to take doctors like you and me to really spread the word, patient by patient, using those social media, blogs, our writings, articles, videos, and such. And that's why we're doing this for people.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Andrew. I'm so excited to meet you. And I know I told you this when we spoke on the phone, but I love your book. I think that really, and as a parent of teenagers, I think that everyone who has kids should read your book. I thought it just blew me away how you were so just candid and so just the way that you described what was going on. And it was really, I never understood how big of a problem video game addiction is. And I just really loved your book. So I just wanted to tell you that. And I'm so glad that you reached out to me because it is really inspiring. There isn't a lot of, can I say this? The way that you were so honest about what happened to you earlier in life and that you just put that all out in the book, I feel like that is so rare, especially in the medical profession, because there's just this culture of like, you hold it together, right? Like, you're on call, you don't sleep, this, that, but everything is okay. And it's just not that common to see someone speaking out about things and being so honest. And it was such a fantastic book. So I just wanted to tell you, I'm such a fan. You have a Andrew Doan fan club. I'm going to sign up.
Thank you so
thanks for
much.
reaching out to me.
Sharon, thank you so much. Appreciate it. Thank you so much for joining us today. And if you enjoyed our video, please remember to like, share, and comment. And also hit the subscribe button so that you're subscribed to my channel and get my future videos. Until next time, have a great day.